With Miller Moss headed to Louisville, where do the Tigers turn next at the quarterback position? All this plus some hoops, too, right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And the Tigers did get their first portal commitment, as well as a commitment from 2026, a four-star player as well. But unfortunately, it wasn't all good news for the Tigers yesterday, and we're going to start the program by talking about the quarterback position. But I also want to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, where you can start the season with a big return. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And obviously not ideal news yesterday, as Miller Moss is heading from USC to Louisville. Had one very insistent Twitter user yesterday telling me over and over again that, oh no, this is a done deal. Moss is going to Missouri. They already figured this all out on Tuesday. This person kept saying it was pre-planned that he was going to Louisville, so don't worry about it. Folks, all plans are pre, as far as I can tell, so I thought that was amusing, first of all. But regardless, the question is now, where does Missouri turn with Moss off of the board? Because here's the interesting thing about this. I've had several viewers comment that they would actually much prefer Fernando Mendoza, formerly of the Cal Bears, to Moss. One said, I prefer Mendoza, but people are underrating Moss. His lack of athleticism is a bit worrisome, but that is his only weakness, for example. So here's the thing. With Mendoza, with Moss, with Malik Murphy, who I think is reportedly probably the Tigers' other biggest option, the former Duke Blue Devil and Texas Longhorn as well. The thing is, as much as I think it's easier to evaluate quarterbacks changing from within the same level, in other words, transfers within college, I have a lot better feel for that than I do, say, high school guys going to college or college guys going to the NFL. Anytime quarterbacks change a level, well, that's some rather dangerous territory to get into in terms of evaluation, I would say. So, to me, I think there's a real debate here. Who is better? Mendoza? Is it Moss? Is it Malik Murphy? Well, I think I may at first glance actually like Mendoza a little better. To me, the most worrisome thing with him is the thing with Mendoza, I think Missouri is likely to turn its attention to now that Moss is off the board. Well, number one, he's got 2 years to play. I do like that part. He's certainly got every bit as much of arm talent as I can see that Miller Moss does. And to me, the most worrisome thing is that last season, I believe I have this right, Mendoza took 41 sacks for the Bears. Now, on one hand, if you're pro Mendoza, you're probably saying, hey, this is a plus for him. And you may be right. Maybe his offensive line was so porous that at Missouri he's going to look much better, for example. But something I try to impress upon my listeners and viewers all the time is that your sack rate actually has a lot more to do with the quarterback than I think people realize. Now, the good news is I'd much rather have a guy who hangs onto the ball too long over the long term than somebody who is afraid to take a shot. I'll certainly give you that. But in the short term, we've seen guys like Jackson Arnold, for example, who want to hold on to the ball a little too long. And that former Oklahoma quarterback, well, because of that tendency, well, he tended to give the ball away a little bit, especially as he did at the end of the game against Missouri, very much thankfully so. And speaking of Jackson Arnold, by the way, since I brought him up, well, the erstwhile Oklahoma Sooner, the Tigers are going to see him likely again next season as well, as Arnold has transferred to Auburn. So indeed, as I've pointed out, a lot of these quarterbacks coming off the market very quickly. I still got to imagine in the next few days here, certainly by the end of next week, you got to think Missouri is going to have another quarterback without a doubt. So we're just going to have to wait and see at this point. But it's not all bad news from the weekend. The good news is former Mississippi State wide receiver, also formerly of Louisville and Jackson State as well, Kevin Coleman tweeted out a picture of him photoshopped into a number 3 Missouri jersey saying, "I'm home." So the former St. Louis area player is indeed coming home to his home state, playing for the Tigers next season. This is definitely a big deal. I think the Tigers needed another receiver in the portal. Despite having a lot of real interesting options, I think Josh Manning has a big-time shot to have a breakout season next year. You know I love Marquise Johnson. I think he was underutilized by Missouri and Kirby Moore this season. So a lot of interesting options. Daniel Blood, of course, James Madison and Courtney Crutchfield were true freshmen on the roster last season. But to get a guy who's more established, a veteran player who you know can be productive in the Southeastern Conference in Kevin Coleman, I think this is a real nice addition for Missouri's roster next season, quite obviously. Also, another bit of good news, 4-star defensive tackle Anthony Kennedy becomes the Tigers' first 2026 high school commitment, the interior defensive lineman from the state of Arkansas. And I just brought up Courtney Crutchfield. Hey, if you watched the Tigers yesterday, Honor Boateng, the top player in basketball from the state of Arkansas. Well, Missouri has really done well recruiting-wise in that state over the last few seasons. You got to love seeing it, don't you? Well, anyway, my point is here, good news for the Tigers yesterday. And if you're one of those people who was really into Miller Moss, I can understand the disappointment. I really can. But I'll just say that after all these years of evaluating quarterbacks, my own confidence in my ability to recognize exactly who the best player is not always perfect. So I'm trying not to overanalyze this stuff is what I'm trying to tell you. And speaking of overanalyzing things, one of those people who was insisting to me that Moss was coming. Well, there is a big difference, I think, between – this is something I think fans need to realize. There's a real big difference between, say, when Matt Zollers, who has been committed to Missouri for a long time, when in high school, when he decided to take a late visit to his home state of Penn State. Well, some Missouri fans got nervous, but I wasn't really one of them because I thought, you know what, Zollers should go ahead and take this visit. Go ahead and have a fun weekend, all that kind of thing. There's really no downside to that for him. And indeed, he takes the visit, ends up signing with Missouri anyway. But in the transfer portal, well, your window is so much smaller. You don't have months and months to kind of bounce around between schools and have fun and go take your official visits. In the portal, well, obviously Miller Moss was officially in the portal for less than a week before he ends up at Louisville. Same for a whole bunch of these other quarterbacks like former Boston College quarterback Thomas Castellanos, who is now with Florida State, for example. So in the portal, when Miller Moss decided, hey, after the Missouri visit, I'm going to Louisville, well, no one should have thought that, oh, well, he's just taking that visit just for the fun of it. He's signed with Missouri here. There's no chance that that's the case. Had he decided and told Missouri that he was going on that visit, there's no reason he's going to waste his time or Louisville's just to, again, the portal visit's not quite the same as the high school visit where they just roll out the red carpet for you. I mean, not that there's not some red carpet being rolled out, but again, it's more of a business visit than a visit for pleasure, I would say. So in the future, if indeed those visits aren't shut down, don't think they're just going for the fun of it. Moss was going to Louisville to truly check out Louisville, which obviously in retrospect, since he signed there, is the most obvious statement in the world. And coming up, a Missouri freshman quarterback has entered the transfer portal. And this move, along with Williams-Nwaneri, has me questioning, what is the point in modern college football, especially if you're a program in the SEC like Missouri? What is the point of taking developmental prospects from high school anymore if none of them are going to stay around long enough to develop? I want to touch on this topic and talk about Missouri basketball's win over Long Island yesterday. But first, I want to tell you that FanDuel is the place to be to tackle all the NFL action this season. It's America's #1 sports book, FanDuel. And right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch during a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you will get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So when Aiden Glover signed out of high school with Missouri about a year ago, well, it was known that he was going to take some time to develop. A kid who had some good athleticism, a good runner, but needed to develop his game, just all the subtleties of the quarterback position. To be sure, at least that was all of the word from everyone coming out of the Mizzou camp, for sure. So if that's the case, to be at Missouri for one season and then to enter the transfer portal as Glover has, I have to wonder, what was the plan from his perspective, from Missouri's perspective? Again, I'm not trying to necessarily find somebody to blame here. That's not really the point. My point is even with somebody like Williams-Nwaneri, who was one of the top 5 players in the entire country, rated by everyone coming out of high school, well, it was still known that for all of his immense physical tools, that he was a fairly raw player as an actual football player as well, not having actually a ton of experience in the sport compared to a lot of highly ranked players like Nwaneri was. So to me, in this modern day of college football, if you're going to pick guys to develop, what's the point? If they're going to develop and then leave after a season or two at best, then you're not going to be bearing the fruits of this development and labor. Somebody else is going to get the rewards here if you're going to stay patient and try to develop somebody. It just seems like those stories, the development stories, are going to be fewer and far between. I genuinely hope, speaking of Missouri basketball, which I'm going to transition to here in just a second, that 5-man Missouri true freshman class, I really like all of those players. I guess I can't really have an opinion on Trent Burns yet, since he has not played a minute for the Tigers. But the point is, Marcus Allen, T.O. Barrett, Peyton Marshall, of course, Honor Boateng. I think all of those guys are really interesting. And as a fan who's a diehard who attended the Long Island game, for crying out loud, I want to see these guys stick around and develop. To me, that's one of the most satisfying things to see as a fan of a college program. So again, I don't have your perfect solution here. I do think it's worth asking, though, is the juice worth the squeeze in terms of actually recruiting guys that are developmental prospects out of high school? Back in the day, that's how Gary Pinkel and his program would make a ton of hay. But in 2024, 25, I'm just not sure that particular strategy makes a lot of sense in the free transfer portal era in which we all now find ourselves. Now, another win for Dennis Gates and Mizzou basketball yesterday. No huge surprise over Long Island, a team that was clearly outmatched, but Missouri now with the nation's 5th longest active winning streak at 9 games. And to me, the biggest takeaway from this game is the topic about Dennis Gates and his rotations is completely dead to me. I think Dennis Gates clearly had a method to his madness because early, guess what? Missouri started the same 5 guys they did against Kansas, and for the first 10 minutes or so, it looked like a pretty good 7-man rotation. Add in there Aiden Shaw and Marquez Warwick, for example. And it wasn't just, the seemingly the bingo hopper rotations, as I sarcastically called it at one point a couple weeks ago. Well, Missouri then put in Jacob Cruz and Peyton Marshall, and there was a bit of a lull there in the first half that coincided with a whole bunch of substitutions there. But to me, after watching the Kansas game, in which Dennis Gates very much had a plan, there was no bingo hopper. It was clearly he had a plan, and he went out and executed it with the main core of, say, 7 guys that he wanted to play, even though, yes, technically 11 guys played in that ball game. 5 of them played 30-plus minutes. So, to me, actually, there does seem to be a lot of method to Gates' madness there. For example, Trent Pierce, a guy who doesn't always play a ton, but yesterday got in, had 17 points in the first half, was just really, really nice to see him get that jump shot going in particular. I also like how he attacks in the fast break, uses his size and athleticism as well. I just, honestly, I was thinking after he hit those first 3 of 4 from downtown, I was just thinking, man, just play Pierce the rest of the game. Let's keep him going, keep that confidence going and everything. And while he didn't literally play him the rest of the game, Pierce got plenty of action and indeed kept that confidence going into the second half. I also liked that Missouri was able to load manage Josh Gray a little bit yesterday because the horse, we're going to need him in the paint in the SEC. There's no doubt about that. That is a long season with a lot of big athletic dudes in the paint. So we're going to need Gray and his rather horse-like body to be controlling the paint all season. He's going to be taking some wear and tear is my point. So to take an opportunity to load manage him and rest his body a little bit in this game, I thought obviously made a ton of sense as well. I mentioned Marquez Warwick, by the way. He has been on absolute fire recently. If anything, he's got to play more. If you need a little bit of an offensive spark added in to the guard setup right now with Caleb Grill still nursing his neck injury, well, clearly Marquez Warwick has got to be playing significant minutes right now because his scoring, especially in this past game, was just tremendous. And speaking of the bingo hopper rotations, again, I'm putting that to the side. That is a dead topic to me. But just in case you did think it was a little random again, well, Marcus Allen, who I think I've praised a lot. I think the true freshman has been a really good addition to this roster so far. I think he's got a really strong future as well. But Allen only got in the game with about 3 minutes left against Long Island. But you know what? Strangely enough, maybe a little ironically, I took that as a positive because that tells me that Dennis Gates kind of trusts Marcus Allen and knows what he has in him. He felt like maybe getting some more action for T.O. Barrett, Jacob Cruz, some guy. Speaking of a guy who could maybe use a little bit of confidence, Cruz hasn't probably played as much as he would have liked so far. Well, it was nice to see him get on the action, hit a 4-point play as well. Tony Perkins, who has had a little bit of a slow start with a lower body injury, hit a couple threes as well. Honestly, while Missouri did what they expected to do in that game, more or less, just getting some guys going that you'd like to see get going for the rest of the season, to me, that's exactly what you want to see in that type of basketball game. So a real positive was that victory over Long Island yesterday. And coming up, some more of your comments on ticket prices being raised, the schedule that season not actually being soft after all, and also some Gary Pinkel appreciation. But you know what? Let's appreciate the new 12-team playoff because it is that time of year. The college football playoff is back. And with the new 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT sports coverage of the college football playoff begins December 21st, starting with the college football playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 10 o'clock Central. Leading into our first matchup, SMU Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at 11 a.m. Central Time. Then Clemson looks to get past Texas in a showdown at 3 o'clock Central. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the college football playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. So on my previous program, I pointed out that I was looking at Georgia's season ticket map and just some real fuzzy math here on my part, but basically looking at the equivalent of my season ticket, and basically Georgia was twice as expensive as Missouri, to which viewer Rick says, as far as the season ticket price goes, I would challenge Missouri to put a Georgia-like product on the field before charging Georgia prices for tickets. We've had season tickets for years, not sure about next season. Well, again, on the personal front there, I certainly can't criticize anybody who's saying, hey, this stuff is getting a little bit too expensive for me. Certainly there are more important things than watching every single Missouri football game live and in person. And as I pointed out, I've had a lot of people tell me that they are considering dropping season tickets. But again, they're not saying they're never going to go to a Missouri game again. They just might go to 3 or 4 instead of all 8 home games next season, for example. Probably important to point out that some of these ticket prices going up does have to do with, yes, you're getting more product next season. 8 home games. That is without precedent, to be sure. But I do hear all of these complaints from people like Rick. Now, to be fair, is Georgia, are they putting out twice as good of a product as Missouri? I wouldn't go that far. Certainly you can't say Missouri and Georgia are equivalent. Yes, Georgia's been much better. They've won multiple national titles recently and all that stuff. Again, I hear you, but it does get back to the thing. Is it chicken or the egg here? Does Missouri, are they not as good as Georgia because they're not spending enough money? Or does Georgia get to charge more because they're better? You know, we can have that particular argument. I'm just trying to give context here about what Missouri is actually competing against in the Southeastern Conference. Now, on the Missouri schedule for next season, once again, it's going to be a similar narrative to last season. Missouri just flipping the home and away opponents, but keeping the sites, I should say, but keeping the opponents the same. Edmond writes in to say that Kansas, South Carolina, Alabama, Texas A&M, and at Oklahoma is not a soft schedule. Well, I'd have to agree with that when you compare it to the rest of the nation, but relative to the SEC, and especially relative to the possibilities that Missouri could face in terms of a schedule. By the way, 8 home games, 4 winnable games, I would say, on the road. The Tigers have been really good, have been excellent at home the past 2 seasons. So to me, that's about as favorable as it's going to get. That's the point. Not necessarily that it's soft. I don't believe I ever said the word soft, by the way. It's just more favorable, relatively speaking, to especially all of the possibilities. Missouri could have had Texas and Georgia on the schedule, but instead, you get Texas A&M, obviously Alabama, Oklahoma, South Carolina. Those are all really good teams, but to say that, look at Florida's schedule last season, for example, it could be a lot worse. That's the point. And finally, Kai, last of the Bruin G, one of my favorite viewers out there. He says, can we just appreciate Gary Pinkel for recruiting quarterback after quarterback after quarterback? The next one was time to take over just when the previous one was ready to move on. And I have to totally and 1,000% agree with this point. Gary Pinkel definitely spoiled Missouri fans at the quarterback position. You think about Brad Smith, who may have been the ultimate program changer, may have changed the trajectory of Gary Pinkel's entire career. Really, may have gotten him into the Hall of Fame. Let's put it that way. Without Brad, does he get there? I kind of doubt it, to be honest with you. And then you move from Brad Smith immediately to Chase Daniel, who most of us would say was even better than Brad Smith, arguably the greatest quarterback in school history. Then a 5-star replacement in Blaine Gabbert, not too shabby there, a solid 2 years for the Tigers. Then you get into James Franklin, who was frankly underappreciated, if anything. Yes, the Matty Mock thing didn't quite work out in 2015, but then you had Drew Lock, another guy who was a longtime starter, ends up being the SEC touchdown leader by the end of his lengthy career, and obviously has made millions of bucks in the NFL. Again, it's really been impressive what Gary Pinkel did during his time. I just broke it all down for you there. We basically had one season where it was like, ooh, that was kind of rough, and unfortunately that just happened to be Gary Pinkel's last season with the Tigers. But really, just looking at that, you'd be hard-pressed to find a better quarterback run in all of college football over a 15-year period than that. And thanks to all of you for your questions and comments, as always. And thanks to Justin and Rob and Brian, 3 different guys who came up to me yesterday and said, hey, are you John Miller? Really like the show. So that always feels good. I appreciate it. Don't be shy if you see me at a Mizzou game. I always love talking to all you everydayers out there. It's always a great interaction. It really is. So I have to admit, I'm getting used to being, I don't know, somewhat of a semi-public figure, I guess. But the good news is all my interactions with the fans are always wonderful. So I encourage you to come up and say hi anytime you would like. But hey, thanks for joining me as always here on Locked On Mizzou. I will see you tomorrow. Surely tons of more quarterback stuff to get to, transfer portal action. I'll have it all for you right here on Locked On Mizzou.